Hi everyone, I'm Stefano from Zen channel. Well, I'm not actually this one. This is a little character that I made and animated in my video. In this tutorial, I want to show you how to animate and simulate this balloon exploding in the air and shatter into these pieces that falls down by the gravity force. We have also this string that reacts accordingly. All these simulation are made in Blender, and we will talk about shape animation, cloth simulation, and also rigid body simulation. We have a lot to do, so let's jump into Blender. So this is my scene. I have this simple balloon that I modeled. It's shaped out of a round sphere. It's quite dense in resolution, as you can see in edit mode. And then I have this simple cylinder as string of our balloon, and these two objects are parented to this null sphere here. So if we want to make this balloon explode in the air, let's make it fly, and I will do a very basic animation here only for the purpose of showing you the idea. So we can insert for the z-axis a single keyframe at frame 1, and then maybe 100 frames ahead. Let's move it a little bit up and insert another one, and also I like to make it a little bit more faster in the beginning and slowly down. So we have our basic animation. Now what we want is that at this frame it will explode. So in order to do this, press Z, go to solid view and select this random color option that we have in this menu here, and let's shift deduplicate our balloon and let's isolate our selection. Enter edit mode, Ctrl+3 face selection and C to circular selecting tool. We want to select some area like this one. The idea is to draw some rough patches, some pieces of our balloon. Let's invert the selection and let's get rid of all the other faces. We can refine a little bit, but this is not so important because it will be very quick and not noticeable. So let's unhide all the rest, and we have the first piece of our balloon. Now we want to repeat this operation for all the other pieces that we want to animate in the explosion. So at the end of this process you should have something like this. Let's hide for a moment my balloon. It doesn't matter if your shapes looks different in your scene, or maybe you have one more or one less. This is not important to understand the process. What is important that now all these new objects that we just created has their own pivot point here, and we want to recenter it to their geometry. So let's select the first one and let's go here, object, set origin, and you can choose origin to geometry. Let's repeat this for all the other pieces. For this last piece I want to have the center point here, so let's enter edit mode, select one point in this area, doesn't have to be precise, shift S, cursor to selected to move my 3D cursor here, and then with my object selected let's go back here and set origin, this time origin to 3D cursor. So we have all our pieces with their own pivot point where we need. Okay, we now want to start animating the all these pieces visibility. Let's unhide our entire balloon, and we are at this frame, and we know that at this frame our entire balloon is still visible, so we can insert one keyframe for the scale, and the frame after we want this to disappear, so we can set 0 on all the three values for the scale, and again set another keyframe. I prefer use scale animation to make object disappear instead of setting the visibility option, because in Blender you have to be careful. You have visibility for render and visibility for the viewport. So in this way I deal only with one value instead of two, but it's my personal choice. In the end is the same. So with the same idea, let's do the opposite. At this frame we want all these objects to be visible, so let's insert one keyframe for the scale value, and the frame before we want to put all these to 0, so we can test going backward and forward one frame, and we can see the switching of our object visibility. Okay, now our explosion is a matter of few frames, and if anyone of you for sure know that when a balloon explodes, the first thing that happens is that all the pieces goes down to their original shape, and this means that they shrink down in scale, and this we can achieve in Blender. And I use the shape key animation for the first frame, so I select one of them, and here under this property page here I create a basic shape key, and then I press plus again to add a new one, and then entering the edit mode and pressing the proportional tool, I want to select maybe this vertex here, and I increase the proportional area, and I want to try to make this shape something like the opposite, because I assume that the air of the explosion is blowing outside the piece of rubber. And then I also want to shrink down, and I also can move away, and maybe I also can rotate it. So in this way, with only one shape animation, I have this first moment. You can see I can slide here and choose between the two shapes. So at this frame, let's insert a keyframe for this value, and maybe 2 frames later I want to go to the next key shape and insert another keyframe. So I have this. Let's do the same process for all the others. So let's have a look at what we have so far. Our balloons reach this point, it disappears, and these 4 pieces appears, and they have their own shape animation that makes them shrink down. What we want now is that they start to fall down, and to get this I will use some cloth simulation without too much focusing on the details of our simulation, because in this case what we only need is for them to fall down essentially. So I want to be sure to set the proper simulation start frame here, and I will try something like 100. Then I enable self collision and I can disable object collision. We don't have object to collide with, and yes, we have this speed multiplier that we want to increase, maybe 10, because otherwise the simulation will be too slow for our purpose. Let's have a look what we have so far. Something went wrong. I think I made the wrong yeah, it's not 100, it's 103. Let's try to use the frame where our shape animation ends. Here it is. So let's see at normal speed. I think we can even do more, maybe. Okay, let's repeat the same for all the others. So now what we want to do is to involve also our string into this little simulation, and this is a little bit tricky because we need this string to follow our balloon's animation while he is going up, and then at the certain frame we want somehow to detach this object from the hierarchy and be free to fall down by the gravity. And to do this I found this way. The first thing, let's put our 3D cursor in this position, so Shift S, cursor to selected, and let's add a simple cube here. I don't want this cube to be rendered, so I will uncheck renders visibility, and also I want this only to be shown as wireframe. Let's name this controller string, and let's select our string object and then shift select this cube, Ctrl P, let's parent the string to this cube in this way, and then we also want to parent this last cube we created to our null control object that we have already animated. So now nothing fancy, if we start our animation, our string follows this little cube that follows this controlling object. So let's turn this little cube into a rigid body object, active rigid body object, it's okay. And we want this rigid body object stay animated until the frame where our balloon explodes. Insert a keyframe for this option here, and the frame after let's deselect this animated check-in box and insert another keyframe. So what we have now is that our object stay animated and follow our hierarchy, and then it starts its own rigid body simulation falling down by itself. And our string object is also following this, and this is what we want. Okay, one thing I forgot that I made in my animated video is that I also animated this cube pretending that it is pushed out from the explosion of the balloons. So to do this I want to grab this keyframe that I made to switch from animated to not animated, and I want to move them ahead maybe 4 frames, so that in this moment I can insert one location keyframe for my cube object. And then now if I go to the frame before this option is animated here, at this point I want to grab this and move, but if I do this, this is going to happen, and that's because there is some conflict between the traditional animation and the simulation. So to move and animate this object, I want to go to this page here and temporarily turn out the rigid body world simulation. So now I am at the right frame. Let's move this little bit, maybe in this position, and let's insert another keyframe here. So now to recap a little bit what is going on here, we have this object that will be animated on its position from this frame to this frame, and from the next frame it will be simulated by the rigid body world. So let's turn this on again, and if we now play our animation, we need more frames on our scene. Yeah, this is way too much. So let's go here and disable this once again. We only need shorter movement. So let's try this one, and we can also change this to linear. Let's turn on again, and yes, we have this. So let's now try to make the final step that is missing, that is add some cloth simulation to our string. Let's go back to the first frame of our scene. Let's go under the physics tabs here, and let's add a cloth simulation. Under here, let's check self collision. And the first frame for the simulation start this time is okay, and I have 200 frames in my scene now. So if I now start my animation, the first problem we have is that our object is no longer following the simulation, and that's because this object is now following the cloth simulation. You can see that when we start, it starts to fall down very slowly, by the way. So we can also already increase this speed multiplier maybe to 3. Okay, and to make this object follow our balloons, we have to pin this to the position that we want. So let's enter edit mode, and let's select this edge loop, this vertex edge loop, and with Ctrl plus we want to grow our selection until maybe this point, and we have to make a vertex group out of this selection. So press the plus button and let's click assign. We can also give a proper name, so pin string maybe. Let's go back to object mode, and if we now go back to our cloth simulation setting tab here, under the shape panel we have this pin group, and we can choose the vertex group that we just created. And if we now play our animation, you can see that this time our object is following properly. So once again, let's see what we have so far. You can see that it is working. We have our balloon that explodes, and our string that starts to following the rigid body cube. By the way, these 4 objects are now stopping at these frames because of their cache, but this is not a problem. We only have to increase the number of simulation frames later. Instead, what I want to do to make a little bit more interesting our string simulation here is to add some force field like a wind, and let's rotate this maybe something like this, and let's increase its strength maybe 600. And I want also to animate this to simulate some gust of wind. So let's insert a rotation keyframe here. Maybe after 2 seconds I want this to be on the opposite direction, and then again opposite direction. We can see now our string moving nicely, but we have this problem that now even the rigid body is flying away, carried by the wind force. And to fix this, we have to go here under the rigid body word and search this field weights panel and locate our wind slider and set it to 0. So this means that the influence of our wind force will be nothing to our rigid body object now. So let's play again our simulation. So finally, and hopefully, we have our animation ready. Yes, all the elements are working in the right way. You can see our string object that is nicely wiggling by the wind, and all the pieces are following their own simulation. And by the way, I already have increased the number of simulation frames for all these pieces. And one thing to remember is that when you bake again the simulation, you have to take into consideration that you have the wind force, and you want to put the wind influence to 0 for each one of these pieces. In this way, we have our wind that moves nicely our string, but all the other pieces are only falling down. Hey, we made it. I hope this video was not too long and that all my explanation was clear, and that somehow you learned something useful from this video. I know that I have to improve the way of my English tutorials, and believe me, I am trying to do my best time after time. But by the way, I want to thank you so much, because my channel reached 200 subscribers now, and that's just great. Thank you so much. So if you didn't do it yet, I also invite you to visit and maybe subscribe to my main YouTube channel, Zen. You can find there a lot of animation and VFX stuff that I made. So have a great day, and thanks again for watching this. See you next time. Ciao.